Hey, this is Heather from K2Z. Hablemos de la liberación del lenguaje. ¡Hurra! Now, suddenly hearing that in Spanish might have made you feel uncomfortable, and you might have thought, oh, I'm accidentally watching the video in Spanish, and I'm meant to be watching English version. Well, as with all of these videos and workshops, I'm really pleased if you feel uncomfortable with the topics that I raise. The idea of language liberation is important for a number of reasons, which I'll get to. But first, I'd like to start with this question. And just notice how it feels to most likely not know what this says. And if we were in a workshop and I pointed to this question and said, we're going to go around the room and you answer it, how would it make you feel? And have you been in countries where, and I'm assuming here that most of my audience will be native English speakers, have you been to countries where people didn't know English and you needed to rely upon a book or Google Translate, or you didn't really get by very well? If English isn't your first language, likely you're already quite familiar with the sensation of not being completely comfortable in an English-only environment. So just sit with that for a second of that discomfort of not knowing what I've asked you. We look around the room to remind us to kind of pay attention to our nervous systems and regulate them a bit if we can, by orienting ourselves to the space around us. Now, this question is, what other languages are in this room? So if we were in a workshop, or if we're in the Facebook group guide, Language Liberation, we might share with people our native languages, any languages that we've learned or are learning. And we can notice that for native English speakers, this workshop will be a lot easier. There's no interpreting going on in the head. There's no difficulty sharing with people what we're thinking due to a language barrier. So, in nature, we don't really like monoculture. We grow some of our food in that way, but in general, we would look outside, and if we only saw one kind of flower in all of the world, we would find that sad. And it would be considered a loss that there's only one kind of flower left in the world, or one color of car in the world, one kind of cloud. Just imagine the lack of diversity that would mean, and what that would feel like for us to look around and see only one type of house, one type of building, one species of bird, one species, one kind of cat, rather than a variety of cats and dogs. And yet we do this with English. English is dominating the globe. I live in Colombia, and I often hear Spanish language music, but also it's pretty common to hear English language music. Not Brazilian, not an indigenous language from Colombia, not German, not French, English. And when there are academic conferences being hosted for international guests, many times they're conducted completely in English, because it's considered a language that everyone's probably going to be okay with who would go to that conference. Even if there are no native English speakers at the conference, they will choose English because they will assume that so many people are bilingual with English. English dominates the planet. Television, movies, books, music. And here in Colombia, it's considered an important skill to have to help you find a job. Even when you would think, why would anyone need to know English for that job? It's considered an asset because we're so globalized. There's so many international dealings that having someone who speaks English means that they can access more resources, access more conferences, meetings, etc., from knowing English. So it's a very coveted skill. In Colombia is not unique in that way. But it means we're left with one dominating language. And that is a loss of diversity. Have a think about that. You can reflect in the Facebook group. You're always welcome to sign up for a workshop. In the workshops, I find out ahead of time if anyone else speaks another language, because I like to demonstrate in this particular workshop, and I want to roll it out to all workshops, that we can decenter English. We can always have another language translating to remind us that English isn't the only language. And also it helps slow us down. If every time I speak, someone echoes it in another language, we're slowing down. We're giving ourselves more time to take in the information that's being said, rather than traveling at the speed of kind of capitalism and time is money, etc. We're slowing down at the speed of, as someone I know says, the speed of revolution. Where we can really take in information and we can really change with that information, because we're not skimming at this surface. And of course, there are white supremacy culture patterns around urgency, which would mean we're not supposed to take time to really listen to people's thinking. Okay, so by having English dominating and so many colonial powers dominating with their languages around the world, it means we've lost languages. And here's a list of recent losses. So it's the date that the last person who spoke that language died. So the language has died out. This is an incredibly sad list. It tells you the name of the language, what language family, and where. So we've got Russia, Brazil, the United States, India, Australia, Argentina, Canada, Latvia, Malaysia. Each of these languages was a different way of looking at the world. It was a different way of expressing someone's own thinking. With each loss, we lose that perspective. The more perspectives we have on how people see the world, the more creativity we're going to have for how to respond appropriately to the crises that we find ourselves in. They are crises of racism or climate change, poverty, pandemics. We're narrowing down the kind of thinking that is possible the more that we let other languages die. And some of this is related to internalized oppression, which we do a workshop on earlier in the series. I have family that migrated from from Colombia to the United States, and when they went, they didn't teach their children Spanish. They didn't want their children to be stigmatized with an accent. They wanted their children to be able to assimilate. So this is a completely understandable decision to take. And it means that those children aren't going to have access to this other perspective. So we're losing all of these perspectives, which would not only have enriched our lives, but we need those perspectives so that we have as much information as possible to come up with what to do. So if we return to the Being an Ally workshop, where humility and curiosity are so important, these are the kinds of attitudes that we need to have around language as well. We need to stop centering English and say, what am I missing about the world? Because I only see the world through the lens of English language vocabulary. So to have humility, to recognize that we can't possibly know everything and have a full perspective on everything without hearing from other people. And so having a curiosity about what could they teach me? What do they think about the concept of time, the concept of urgency, the concept of certainty, which is going to come up in another workshop? All of these are culturally driven concepts and ideas. So let's have that humility and curiosity. And the only way to get that perspective is to allow people to speak their thoughts, write their thoughts in their native language. Requiring people to have to do everything in English limits what they're able to say. It's one thing to write it in their own language and then have it translated. Won't be a perfect translation, etc., or have it interpreted. But at least their best thinking was able to come out by being able to access their native language, the language that they use since birth. So if we're in a mixed group, native and non-native English speakers, it's great to take that time to use interpretation, to listen to people speak in their own language, what they're thinking, and then afterwards they could repeat it in English or someone else could interpret for them. But allow that access to their thinking to happen in the meeting, in the workshop, knowing that that's where the beauty and value is going to be for everybody, rather than forcing English. Okay. Be curious about what languages your own family has lost. Your grandparents, your great-grandparents, maybe even your parents. What languages did your families used to speak and now only speak English, for example? Or Colombians, indigenous languages have been lost. Think about that. You could pause the video, of course, to spend more time thinking. So just to finish this up by circling back to the white supremacy culture patterns from the first workshop that I do, and that there's only one right way to do things. Like English is the only language we should be using, that things are urgent, we don't have time to interpret, we don't have time to make things accessible. Of course, this applies to disability issues as well. The written word is the best way to communicate. We're missing out on facial expressions. We're missing out on ways different languages express themselves with not just vocabulary and grammar, but in the way that their faces are used, sometimes their hands and bodies. So it does play out in that way. And there's a kind of lack of nuance in saying that it has to just be English, and we don't want to be able to have to cope with miscommunication that might happen with different languages. So I invite you to go back to the white supremacy culture patterns to notice where they're playing up around language. And I also invite you to any of the other workshops that I put on. And all of these are also guides in the Facebook group. So you can click on the link at the end of this video to learn about how to join the Facebook group so that you can be around people who've done the workshops or watch the videos and share thoughts. And when things come up in everyday life, you'll have a place to unpack them using this framework. And the website, kduzi.org, always happy to schedule a one-to-one with you or run a workshop with a group. Okay, so lastly, if you value this work, we'd really appreciate a donation here in Colombia. Cost of living is low, which means British pounds, US dollars go really far for us. And the PayPal is HeatherLuna1, and I look forward to seeing you in another space. Thanks.